February 15, 1942. Wehrmacht Headquarters, Berlin. General Major Friedrich Paulus reviewed intelligence reports from the Far East with quiet satisfaction. Singapore had fallen that morning. With it, 90% of the world's natural rubber supply now rested firmly in Japanese hands. Across the Atlantic, he knew, the Americans faced industrial paralysis. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every tank required 1 ton of rubber, every battleship, 75 tons. The United States military alone consumed more than half the world's rubber supply before the war. Now, Japanese forces controlled the plantations of Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and French Indochina. The calculations seemed inescapable. Without rubber, the Americans couldn't build trucks. Without trucks, they couldn't transport supplies. Without supplies, their vaunted industrial capacity meant nothing. German industrial planners had studied this vulnerability for years. They understood intimately the tyranny of resource dependency. Germany itself had suffered through World War I when British blockades cut off natural rubber supplies. The memory haunted German strategic thinking. This time, they had prepared differently. By 1935, Farben had developed Buna synthetic rubber. German factories now produced 30,000 tons annually, enough to sustain Wehrmacht operations independent of Southeast Asian plantations. The Americans, confident in their access to cheap natural rubber, had made no such preparations. U.S. synthetic rubber production in 1941 totaled a mere 231 tons, less than 1% of national consumption. Germany's stockpiles exceeded 700,000 tons. America's reserves, accumulated hastily in late 1941, totaled just over 600,000 tons. At current consumption rates, those stockpiles would last perhaps 18 months, certainly no more than 2 years. What German planners didn't know was that 6,000 miles away, in laboratories from Akron to Cambridge, American chemists were about to achieve what German military science considered impossible. They would build an entirely new industry from scratch, scaling production from 200 tons to more than 700,000 tons annually within 3 years. They would develop synthetic rubber superior to Germany's Buna formulation, manufacture it at 1/3 the cost, and produce enough to build not just the trucks Germany feared, but an entire mechanized army that would roll across Europe on American-made tires. The Germans had laughed at American industrial capacity before. They were about to learn, once again, that underestimating American production was the most expensive mistake an adversary could make. This wasn't just the story of a material. This was the story of how industrial democracy mobilized faster than totalitarian efficiency, how American chemists achieved in months what took Germany a decade, and how synthetic rubber became the foundation upon which the Allies built victory. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The crisis began not with Pearl Harbor, but with recognition that had come far too late. In June 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt declared rubber a strategic and critical material. The declaration sounded dramatic, but it represented an admission of failure. For 2 decades, American industry and government had ignored warnings about rubber vulnerability. Now, with war spreading across Europe and Asia, that complacency faced catastrophic consequences. The rubber situation wasn't simply about supply. It represented a fundamental weakness in American industrial preparedness. Rubber wasn't optional in modern warfare. It formed the foundation of mechanization itself. Tires, obviously, required rubber, but so did engine gaskets, fuel line seals, electrical insulation, gun recoil mechanisms, gas mask filters, life rafts, pontoon bridges, and thousands of other components essential to military operations. The numbers told a stark story. A single medium tank required 800 pounds of rubber for tracks, gaskets, and seals. A heavy bomber needed half a ton. A battleship consumed 75 tons. Beyond military needs, the civilian economy depended utterly on rubber. Without it, civilian trucks couldn't move food to cities. Trains couldn't run without rubber gaskets in brake systems. Factories couldn't operate without rubber belts driving machinery. American consumption before the war exceeded 600,000 tons annually. 97% came from Southeast Asian plantations in British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, and Thailand. The United States produced virtually no natural rubber domestically. A few experimental projects investigated guayule cultivation in Mexico and California, but these supplied negligible quantities. The Roosevelt administration created the Rubber Reserve Company in June 1940 to stockpile natural rubber while supplies remained accessible. Jesse Jones, head of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, received authority to purchase rubber on world markets and fund development of synthetic alternatives. The effort started too late and moved too slowly. Between June 1940 and December 1941, the Rubber Reserve Company purchased approximately 538,000 tons of natural rubber. This stockpile, while substantial, represented less than 1 year's consumption at pre-war rates. With military expansion accelerating consumption dramatically, the stockpile might last 8 months, perhaps 10 if severely rationed. German military planners watched American rubber stockpiling with professional interest. Their reports noted American efforts but dismissed them as inadequate. The Germans had fought World War I with methyl rubber, an expensive, inferior substitute that required massive subsidies. They assumed Americans, starting from nearly zero synthetic production capacity, couldn't possibly scale production fast enough to matter. German confidence rested on hard experience. I.G. Farben had worked on synthetic rubber since the 1920s. Their breakthrough came in 1929 with Buna S, a copolymer of butadiene and styrene produced through sodium polymerization. Even with government subsidies and guaranteed military purchases, German synthetic rubber remained 3 times more expensive than natural rubber. Hitler personally championed synthetic rubber development as part of his autarky policy. Germany would achieve economic self-sufficiency in strategic materials, eliminating dependence on potentially hostile foreign suppliers. By 1935, I.G. Farben's first large synthetic rubber plant operated at Schkopau, producing 12,000 tons annually. By 1940, German capacity reached 30,000 tons. The American response to synthetic rubber development moved at a pace German planners found predictable and reassuring. A few companies conducted research. Goodyear built and tested the first American synthetic rubber tire in 1937. DuPont had developed neoprene in 1923, but neoprene's specialty applications didn't replace general-purpose natural rubber. Standard Oil worked with I.G. Farben through patent-sharing agreements, acquiring German Buna technology in exchange for petroleum cracking processes. These developments remained small-scale and experimental. No American company invested in large synthetic rubber plants because natural rubber from Southeast Asia remained cheap and abundant. Why spend millions building synthetic capacity when natural rubber cost 15 cents per pound delivered to American ports? The market logic seemed unassailable. Until December 7, 1941, changed everything. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor transformed rubber from an economic question into an existential crisis. Within 70 days, Japanese forces captured Singapore, the world's largest rubber port. They occupied the Dutch East Indies, controlling 60% of global rubber production. They seized French Indochina and invaded Thailand. 90% of the world's natural rubber supply now operated under Japanese control. The United States faced industrial collapse. The small stockpile accumulated in 1940 and early 1941 represented the only rubber available. Once exhausted, American factories would halt. Vehicles would sit immobile for lack of replacement tires. Military expansion would stop. The war might be lost before major American forces even reached combat theaters. German strategic assessments in February and March 1942 reflected confidence bordering on certainty. Intelligence reports detailed American rubber reserves and consumption rates. The math seemed straightforward. Americans consumed approximately 800,000 tons of rubber annually during peacetime. War production would increase that to over 1 million tons. Their stockpile of 600,000 tons would last perhaps 8 months. After that, the vaunted American arsenal of democracy would run dry. What German planners failed to anticipate was the speed and scale of American response. They assumed American synthetic rubber development would follow German patterns: slow technical development, gradual capacity expansion, production reaching meaningful levels only after several years. These assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The Americans were about to demonstrate that industrial democracy, when properly motivated and organized, could outpace totalitarian planning by orders of magnitude. On January 1, 1942, American synthetic rubber production capacity totaled less than 10,000 tons annually. By January 1, 1945, that capacity would exceed 800,000 tons, from effectively zero to more than German capacity in 3 years. The transformation required not just technical innovation, but fundamental reorganization of American industry and unprecedented cooperation between competing companies. The technical challenge appeared daunting. Synthetic rubber required petroleum-based feedstocks, complex chemical processes, and industrial infrastructure that didn't exist. The primary ingredient, butadiene, could be produced either from petroleum products or from grain alcohol. Both production methods required building entirely new chemical plants. Styrene production needed similar expansion. The polymerization process itself demanded specialized equipment and precise temperature control. German experience suggested this development would take 5 to 7 years minimum. I.G. Farben had worked 2 decades to achieve their 1940 production levels. American chemists, starting essentially from scratch, would need to compress that development into months, not years. German technical experts considered such acceleration technically impossible. They were wrong, but their error revealed fundamental misunderstandings about American industrial capacity. The American response began chaotically. Multiple government agencies competed for authority. The War Production Board, established in January 1942, theoretically coordinated industrial mobilization. The Rubber Reserve Company controlled synthetic rubber plant construction and material allocation. The Office of Price Administration managed civilian rationing. The petroleum industry wanted synthetic rubber produced from petroleum byproducts. The agricultural lobby demanded production from grain alcohol, which would support corn farmers. This bureaucratic confusion delayed critical decisions. While agencies argued, rubber stockpiles dwindled. German U-boats in the Atlantic sank tankers carrying what little natural rubber still reached American ports from South America and Africa. Every week of delay meant less rubber for both military and civilian needs. Gasoline rationing began not primarily to conserve fuel, but to reduce tire wear and extend rubber supplies. Americans received ration books limiting purchases of shoes, rubber goods, and eventually meat and sugar. But rubber shortages threatened far more than consumer inconvenience. By mid-1942, American military expansion faced imminent halt. Tank production required more rubber than stockpiles could sustain. Aircraft manufacturing needed rubber components in quantities exceeding available supplies. The Red Ball Express that would eventually supply Patton's advance across France depended entirely on building trucks. Those trucks required tires. Those tires required rubber. Without solving the rubber crisis, there would be no Red Ball Express, no mechanized advance, perhaps no Allied victory. The Roosevelt administration recognized that technical solutions alone couldn't solve this crisis. Political will and organizational capacity mattered as much as chemical engineering. In August 1942, Roosevelt appointed Bernard Baruch to chair the Rubber Survey Committee. Baruch, who had managed American war production during World War I, brought credibility and authority that cut through bureaucratic paralysis. Baruch recruited James B. Conant, president of Harvard and a distinguished chemist, and Carl T. Compton, president of MIT and a noted physicist. Together, They had 35 days to assess the rubber situation and recommend solutions. German planners, observing American confusion through intelligence reports, concluded the Americans would never organize an effective response in time. They were watching chaos, but missing the pattern. American industrial mobilization looked disorganized because it was decentralized. Multiple companies, universities, and government agencies worked simultaneously on overlapping problems. This redundancy seemed inefficient by German standards of centralized planning, but redundancy created resilience. If one approach failed, 3 others continued. If one company couldn't solve a technical problem, 10 others attacked the same challenge from different angles. The Baruch Committee worked with unprecedented speed. They interviewed industry executives, visited chemical plants, consulted petroleum engineers and agricultural experts, reviewed patent disputes, and analyzed production bottlenecks. On September 10, 1942, just 35 days after their appointment, they delivered their report. The Baruch report recommended immediate construction of 51 government-financed synthetic rubber plants. Total capacity, 800,000 tons annually. Cost, $673 million. For comparison, the Manhattan Project developing the atomic bomb would ultimately cost $2 billion. The United States was spending 1/3 as much on synthetic rubber as on nuclear weapons. The priorities reflected wartime reality. Without rubber, there would be no trucks to deliver atomic bombs, even if they were successfully developed. The report settled the feedstock dispute decisively. Synthetic rubber would be produced primarily from petroleum byproducts, not grain alcohol. Petroleum-based production cost 1/3 less than alcohol-based methods and didn't compete with food production. Grain alcohol would supply only supplementary capacity. This decision enraged the agricultural lobby, but reflected technical and economic reality. More significantly, the Baruch report broke the patent impasse that had paralyzed development. American rubber companies had competed for patents rather than cooperating on development. Standard Oil's relationship with IG Farben created antitrust concerns. Companies feared sharing technical information with competitors. The report recommended complete patent pooling under government supervision. All synthetic rubber technology would be shared among all producers, eliminating competitive advantages and accelerating development. This solution required suspending antitrust enforcement, which troubled many Americans who remembered corporate trusts from the 1920s. But war necessitated cooperation that peacetime would never permit. 4 major rubber companies, Goodyear, Firestone, BF, Goodrich, and US Rubber, agreed to share all patents and technical knowledge with each other and with government researchers. Standard Oil's participation proved most controversial. The company's pre-war agreements with IG Farben raised questions about whether those agreements had deliberately restricted American synthetic rubber development to benefit German industry. Deputy Attorney General Thurman Arnold accused Standard Oil of treasonous collaboration. Congressional investigators demanded prosecution. Roosevelt, recognizing that Standard Oil controlled critical petroleum cracking technology essential for butadiene production, granted antitrust immunity. The controversy raged in newspapers and Congress, but practical necessity overrode legal concerns. The technical challenge ahead remained formidable even with patents shared and funding secured. Building 51 new chemical plants while simultaneously developing production processes that had never operated at industrial scale seemed impossible by conventional engineering standards. German observers noted American plans with professional skepticism. Their experience suggested such plants would require 3 to 5 years to construct and commission. By then, the war might well be over, decided by forces that still possessed adequate rubber supplies. What Germans didn't understand was American construction methodology. German industrial plants were built to precise specifications after extensive planning. American plants were designed and built simultaneously, with engineers solving problems on construction sites as they arose. This approach seemed reckless and inefficient. It was neither. It was faster. The first synthetic rubber plant broke ground in October 1942 at Institute, West Virginia. Standard Oil and Carbide and Carbon Chemicals Corporation jointly operated the facility under government contract. The plant would produce butadiene from petroleum cracking. Construction proceeded 24 hours daily. Welders worked night shifts under floodlights. Equipment manufacturers received top priority for steel, copper, and other materials diverted from less critical applications. Similar construction accelerated at 14 other initial sites. Goodyear built plants at Akron, Ohio, and Houston, Texas. Firestone constructed facilities at Akron and Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Goodrich and U.S. Rubber built their own plants. Smaller companies joined the effort. The government financed everything through Defense Plant Corporation, retaining ownership while contracting operations to private companies. Simultaneously, university researchers worked on improving synthetic rubber formulations. The Germans had developed Buna S through sodium polymerization. American chemists at the University of Illinois, led by Carl Speed Marvel, discovered that polymerization using sodium produced rubber with inconsistent quality. They developed cold rubber processes using lower temperatures and different catalysts. The new formulation, designated GRS for government rubber styrene, proved superior to German Buna S in abrasion resistance and heat stability. This technical superiority mattered enormously. Tires made from early Buna S wore out faster than natural rubber tires. GRS tires matched or exceeded natural rubber durability. For military vehicles, operating under extreme conditions, this difference meant trucks could travel farther before requiring replacement tires. For the Red Ball Express that would supply Allied armies across France, superior tire durability would prove essential. Testing proceeded simultaneously with development. The Army Ordnance Corps tested synthetic rubber under battlefield conditions, subjecting tires to extreme temperatures, rough terrain, and overloading. Early results disappointed. Synthetic rubber performed adequately in temperate conditions, but failed in extreme heat or cold. Researchers adjusted formulations, adding plasticizers for cold weather flexibility and modifying vulcanization processes for heat resistance. By December 1942, the first 4 synthetic rubber plants had begun operations. Initial production totaled just 3,721 tons. German intelligence noted American production but considered it negligible. Their own synthetic rubber capacity exceeded American output by a factor of 8. The gap seemed insurmountable. What German analysts failed to recognize was American production velocity. Those first 4 plants represented proof of concept. 15 more plants were under construction, scheduled for completion by mid-1943. Another 32 plants would open by late 1943 and early 1944. American synthetic rubber production wouldn't grow linearly, it would accelerate exponentially. The production statistics tell the story of that acceleration. 1942, 3,721 tons. 1943, 182,259 tons. 1944, 670,268 tons. 1945, 756,042 tons. From effectively 0 to 750,000 tons in 3 years. German synthetic rubber production, meanwhile, had peaked at approximately 45,000 tons annually and began declining as Allied bombing destroyed chemical plants. By any measure, the American synthetic rubber program represented industrial achievement on a scale German planners had never imagined possible. The speed of development shattered conventional assumptions about how long industrial mobilization required. The scale of production exceeded anything attempted in peacetime or war. The German response to American synthetic rubber production revealed a fundamental flaw in Wehrmacht strategic analysis. German industrial planners understood chemistry, understood manufacturing, understood economics. What they didn't understand was American industrial culture. That misunderstanding would cost them the war. In March 1943, German intelligence compiled comprehensive reports on American synthetic rubber plants. The numbers seemed wrong. 15 plants operational, monthly production exceeding 15,000 tons, German analysts recalculated. The figures held. Americans were producing synthetic rubber at rates that should have required 5 years to achieve, yet they had accomplished it in less than 18 months from program initiation. General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel reviewed the intelligence at Wehrmacht High Command headquarters. His initial reaction mirrored that of his staff. The Americans must be inflating production figures for propaganda purposes. Actual output probably ran 1/3 of reported levels. This assumption reflected German experience with wartime propaganda and Soviet production claims that routinely exaggerated actual output. But additional intelligence contradicted that comfortable explanation. American truck production was accelerating, not declining. Tank production exceeded projections. Aircraft manufacturing showed no signs of rubber shortages constraining output. Either American stockpiles were larger than German estimates suggested, or American synthetic rubber production was actually achieving the impossible tonnages reported. By June 1943, Wehrmacht planners could no longer deny reality. American synthetic rubber production had reached levels Germany had taken 15 years to achieve. More disturbing, production continued accelerating. New plants opened monthly. Output per plant exceeded German factory productivity by significant margins. The Americans had somehow compressed decades of development into months and achieved production efficiency that German chemical industry couldn't match. General der Infanterie Georg Thomas, chief of the War Economy and Armaments Office, submitted a classified assessment to Hitler in July 1943. The report made uncomfortable reading. American synthetic rubber capacity would exceed 1 million tons annually by 1945. That capacity would support mechanized armies operating on a scale Germany couldn't sustain. More significantly, it demonstrated American industrial mobilization capability that exceeded German capacity by orders of magnitude. Thomas's analysis went beyond rubber production numbers. He examined the organizational methods Americans employed: patent sharing among competitors, government financing with private operation, 24-hour construction schedules, simultaneous development and production, tolerance for initial failures and rapid iteration toward solutions. These methods violated German industrial doctrine, but achieved results German methods couldn't match. The Wehrmacht's own synthetic rubber program, supposedly superior through centralized planning and technical expertise, was failing. Allied bombing had destroyed the Hull's synthetic rubber plant near Recklinghausen in June 1943. The Schkopau plant suffered damage in May 1944. Repairs consumed resources and time. Even undamaged plants struggled to maintain production as Allied advances cut off access to coal needed for Bühne synthesis. German planners had assumed American reliance on petroleum-based synthetic rubber represented a weakness. Petroleum was finite, and Americans would exhaust accessible supplies. This calculation ignored American petroleum production capacity. The United States produced more petroleum annually than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. Americans could afford to dedicate petroleum byproducts to synthetic rubber because they had petroleum abundance that Germany lacked. The cost comparison revealed another uncomfortable reality. German Bühne S rubber cost approximately 45 cents per pound to produce in 1943. American GRS cost 15 cents per pound. This 3-to-1 cost advantage reflected American production scale, superior feedstock availability, and manufacturing efficiency. Germans paid premium prices for inferior rubber. Americans produced superior rubber at commodity prices. Quality differences compounded German disadvantages. Early German Bühne S performed adequately for truck tires under normal conditions, but degraded rapidly in extreme temperatures. Wehrmacht vehicles operating in Russia during winter experienced chronic tire failures. Summer heat in North Africa caused similar problems. American GRS, refined through rapid iteration based on military testing, performed reliably across temperature extremes. By autumn 1943, captured American equipment confirmed German fears. Wehrmacht mechanics examining destroyed American trucks found tire treads showing minimal wear despite documented high mileage. Synthetic rubber tires from American production matched or exceeded natural rubber durability. German synthetic tires wore out 30% faster than natural rubber under equivalent conditions. The strategic implications were catastrophic for German defensive planning. Wehrmacht doctrine assumed American mechanized forces would eventually halt due to logistics limitations. Natural rubber scarcity would constrain American truck production. Synthetic rubber programs couldn't possibly scale fast enough to replace natural rubber supplies. These assumptions underpinned defensive strategies on both eastern and western fronts. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Those assumptions were wrong. American truck production accelerated throughout 1943 and 1944. GMC produced 562,750 CCKW trucks between 1941 and 1945. The workhorse deuce and a half, built in numbers second only to the Jeep among American military vehicles. Each truck required multiple tires. Each tire required rubber. The synthetic rubber program supplied all of it. Production statistics for 1944 demonstrated the scale of American achievement. 670,000 tons of synthetic rubber produced. That tonnage supported production of 2.4 million military trucks across all weight classes. 812,000 were 2.5-ton trucks. Every single one rolled on American synthetic rubber tires. The Red Ball Express, which would keep Patton's Third Army supplied across France, depended entirely on synthetic rubber that hadn't existed 3 years earlier. German generals who had dismissed American industrial capacity now faced the consequences of their error. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander West, reported in August 1944 that American logistics superiority stemmed not from better tactics, but from material abundance. American units operated with unlimited supplies because American trucks delivered those supplies faster than combat consumed them. Those trucks ran on synthetic rubber tires that German intelligence had predicted wouldn't exist in meaningful quantities until 1946 or later. The human cost of German miscalculation became apparent during the Normandy campaign. Wehrmacht logistics, still dependent primarily on horse-drawn transport, couldn't match American mechanized supply systems. German divisions retreating across France found themselves out of fuel, out of ammunition, and out of replacement equipment, not because Allied tactical brilliance destroyed German supplies, but because German logistics couldn't deliver supplies to frontline units. American trucks, meanwhile, formed endless convoys that Wehrmacht soldiers could hear through the night. The sound of American engines became psychological warfare as effective as artillery bombardment. Every German soldier understood what those engines meant. Unlimited American supplies, unlimited American ammunition, unlimited American fuel. Fighting an enemy with unlimited material support was fighting a losing battle, regardless of individual courage or tactical skill. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical achievements behind synthetic rubber production deserve recognition beyond production statistics. American chemists solved problems in months that German researchers had struggled with for years. These weren't incremental improvements. They represented fundamental advances in polymer chemistry, industrial catalysis, and process engineering. Carl Speed Marvel at the University of Illinois led research on cold rubber processes. His team discovered that polymerizing butadiene and styrene at 41 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 122 degrees produced rubber with superior properties. Lower temperature polymerization created more uniform polymer chains, resulting in better abrasion resistance and longer tire life. This single innovation improved synthetic rubber performance by 25%. Piet Kolthoff at the University of Minnesota developed improved emulsion polymerization techniques. His work on soap systems and catalyst selection produced rubber with consistent quality regardless of production conditions. Manufacturing consistency mattered enormously for military applications. Tires that performed reliably under all conditions saved lives and kept vehicles operational. Maurice Karash at the University of Chicago researched antioxidants and stabilizers that prevented rubber degradation. Synthetic rubber without proper stabilization deteriorated rapidly when exposed to oxygen and ozone. His formulations extended tire life threefold, making synthetic rubber genuinely superior to natural rubber for many applications. These academic researchers shared their findings immediately with industrial partners. No patents delayed implementation. No competitive advantages restricted information flow. Government contracts required complete information sharing. This open collaboration accelerated development beyond anything possible under normal competitive conditions. Industrial partners translated academic research into manufacturing reality with equal speed. Goodyear built the first large-scale cold rubber plant in Akron, Ohio, operational by November 1943. Within 6 months, cold rubber processes had replaced hot rubber methods across most American production. German industry, learning of American advances through intelligence reports, couldn't replicate the achievement. They lacked the petroleum feedstocks, the industrial equipment, and increasingly, the time. The scale of American synthetic rubber infrastructure becomes clear through specific examples. The Goodyear plant at Houston, Texas, covered 65 acres under roof. The facility employed 4,000 workers, operating 3 shifts daily. Monthly production reached 4,000 tons. One plant produced more synthetic rubber monthly than Germany's entire industry had produced annually in 1935. Standardization multiplied efficiency gains. All American synthetic rubber plants used identical processes and equipment specifications. Engineers trained at one facility could transfer to another without retraining. Spare parts fit every plant's equipment. Technical improvements at any single facility transferred immediately to all others. This standardization seemed mundane, but enabled coordination impossible in German industry, where different plants used different processes and non-interchangeable equipment. The transportation network supporting synthetic rubber production revealed another dimension of American logistics mastery. Butadiene plants shipped product to polymerization facilities. Polymerization plants delivered rubber to tire factories. Tire factories supplied military distribution centers. This multi-stage supply chain moved millions of tons of material monthly without disruption. German logistics officers, struggling to move basic supplies to frontline units, studied American distribution networks with professional despair. Railroad infrastructure carried most domestic rubber transport. American railways, unlike European systems, used standardized gauge nationwide. Freight cars moved seamlessly across state lines without cargo transfers. The United States operated more railroad track miles than all of Europe combined. This infrastructure advantage, built over decades of peacetime development, proved decisive during wartime mobilization. Petroleum pipelines, another American infrastructure advantage, supplied synthetic rubber plants with feedstocks. These pipelines operated continuously, delivering petroleum distillates on predictable schedules. German synthetic rubber plants, dependent on coal supplies, increasingly disrupted by Allied bombing, faced chronic feedstock shortages. Infrastructure differences that seemed trivial during peacetime became decisive during war. Worker productivity at American synthetic rubber plants exceeded German output per worker by 40%. This productivity gap reflected multiple factors. Better equipment, certainly. Superior plant design helped, but workforce motivation mattered significantly. American workers understood they were building capacity that would help win the war. German workers, increasingly composed of forced labor from occupied territories, had no such motivation. African American workers comprised significant portions of synthetic rubber plant workforces, particularly in southern facilities. These workers faced discrimination in hiring and advancement but performed with dedication despite unequal treatment. The irony paralleled that of Red Ball Express drivers. Black workers built the rubber that enabled the tires that equipped the trucks that African American drivers piloted across France. They were defeating Nazi racial ideology through industrial performance, proving Hitler's theories wrong with every shift worked. Women workers, entering chemical industry employment in unprecedented numbers, operated complex equipment and performed quality control testing previously restricted to male workers. By 1944, women comprised 30% of synthetic rubber plant workforces. Their performance demonstrated capabilities that pre-war discrimination had suppressed. The war necessitated utilizing all available talent regardless of gender or race, revealing that previous restrictions had served prejudice rather than productivity. The quality control systems developed for synthetic rubber production established standards that influenced post-war American manufacturing. Every batch received rigorous testing for tensile strength, elongation, abrasion resistance, and temperature stability. Statistical process control, pioneered at Bell Laboratories and DuPont, ensured consistent quality across millions of tons of production. German quality control, dependent on individual inspector skill rather than statistical methods, couldn't match American consistency. Testing facilities at Akron subjected synthetic rubber to conditions exceeding battlefield extremes. Tires ran on dynamometers simulating 10,000 miles of rough terrain. Samples were frozen to -40 degrees Fahrenheit and heated to 200 degrees. Accelerated aging tests predicted performance after years of storage. This comprehensive testing regime identified problems before products reached military users, ensuring reliability that German equipment increasingly lacked. The synthetic rubber program's success cascaded through American industrial mobilization. With rubber supplies secured, truck production could accelerate without constraint. Tank production increased. Aircraft manufacturing expanded. Every military vehicle, weapon system, and piece of equipment dependent on rubber components could be built in quantities limited only by other production constraints, not by rubber scarcity. The psychological impact on German strategic planning proved as significant as material advantages. Wehrmacht High Command could no longer assume American logistics would eventually fail. Americans had demonstrated they could build entirely new industries at scales exceeding German comprehension. If Americans could achieve this with synthetic rubber, what other industrial miracles might they accomplish? That question haunted German planning throughout 1944 and 1945. Captured German documents revealed the depth of strategic miscalculation. Intelligence assessments from early 1942 predicted American synthetic rubber production would reach meaningful levels no earlier than 1945. Those predictions assumed German development timelines and German production methodologies. Americans achieved in 18 months what Germans had assumed would require 5 years. The prediction error wasn't merely wrong, it was catastrophically, war-losingly wrong. German chemical industry leaders, interrogated after the war, expressed uniform amazement at American synthetic rubber. To achievement. Dr. Heinrich Hörlein, director of IG, Farben's pharmaceutical division, told interrogators that American production scales seemed physically impossible based on available feedstocks and equipment. He had reviewed intelligence reports but dismissed them as propaganda until captured American synthetic rubber samples proved otherwise. The rubber was real. The production figures were accurate. Everything German industry had assumed about synthetic rubber economics and production timelines had been wrong. The cost comparison between American and German synthetic rubber programs illustrated fundamental differences in industrial philosophy. Germany invested approximately 2 billion Reichsmarks developing Buna rubber between 1929 and 1945. That investment produced cumulative output of roughly 600,000 tons across 15 years. America spent $673 million building synthetic rubber capacity between 1942 and 1945. That investment produced cumulative output exceeding 1.4 million tons in 3 years. Americans achieved twice the output at 1/3, the cost in 1/5 the time. These ratios revealed advantages beyond mere economics. They demonstrated superior project management, better industrial coordination, and more effective resource allocation. German central planning, supposedly more efficient than democratic industrial organization, had been outperformed decisively by American methods that appeared chaotic and disorganized. The irony was that American success stemmed partly from decentralization that Germans viewed as weakness. Multiple companies competed to solve technical problems. Multiple research teams attacked challenges from different angles. Multiple plants experimented with process variations. This redundancy seemed wasteful. It was actually resilient. When one approach failed, 3 others continued. Successful innovations spread rapidly across the entire industry. Failures were abandoned quickly without systemic disruption. German centralization, conversely, created fragility. I.G. Farben controlled synthetic rubber development through patent monopoly and government contracts. When I.G. Farben plants suffered bomb damage, German synthetic rubber production collapsed because no alternative capacity existed. Centralized planning had created efficiency but eliminated redundancy. That worked adequately during peacetime. During war, facing enemy bombing campaigns, centralization proved catastrophic. By January 1945, German synthetic rubber production had declined to less than 15,000 tons monthly. Allied bombing had destroyed the Lohna plant in November 1944. The Hüls plant operated at 15% capacity. Ludwigshafen and Oppau facilities suffered repeated damage. German vehicle production, already constrained by steel and labor shortages, now faced rubber scarcity as well. Wehrmacht units received orders to salvage rubber from destroyed vehicles and reuse it wherever possible. American synthetic rubber production, meanwhile, reached 63,000 tons monthly by January 1945. Production capacity exceeded immediate military requirements. Stockpiles accumulated. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, rubber ceased being a constraint on American military planning. The crisis that German strategists had counted on to paralyze American industry had been solved so completely that rubber had transformed from scarcity to surplus. The Red Ball Express, which began operations in August 1944, represented synthetic rubber's most visible military impact. 5,958 trucks, rolling continuously between Normandy and frontline units, delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily. Every truck ran on synthetic rubber tires. Every tire came from American plants that hadn't existed 3 years earlier. German forces observing Red Ball convoys counted vehicles and calculated consumption rates. The mathematics seemed impossible. That many trucks, traveling that many miles, should exhaust American rubber supplies within months. Yet the convoys continued. New trucks arrived from American factories faster than old trucks wore out. German calculations were correct regarding consumption. They were wrong about supply. American synthetic rubber production exceeded even optimistic German estimates. The trucks themselves embodied synthetic rubber's contribution beyond tires. Engine gaskets, fuel line seals, electrical insulation, vibration dampeners, all used synthetic rubber components. The GMC CCKW contained approximately 150 pounds of rubber across all applications. Multiply that by 562,000 trucks produced, and the total exceeded 42,000 tons of rubber consumed just for deuce and a half production. Natural rubber supplies could never have supported such production volumes. Tank production required even more rubber per vehicle. An M4 Sherman tank used 800 pounds of rubber for track pads, suspension components, turret seals, and engine parts. The United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks during the war. Total rubber consumption, 19,700 tons. Add other armored vehicles, and armored forces alone consumed over 30,000 tons of rubber. Aircraft manufacturing demanded specialized rubber compounds resistant to petroleum products and extreme temperatures. A B-17 Flying Fortress bomber required 500 pounds of rubber for tire inner tubes, fuel tank sealants, oxygen system seals, and electrical insulation. The United States produced 12,731 B-17 seconds, consuming over 3,000 tons of specialized rubber. Total aircraft production consumed approximately 25,000 tons across all types. These consumption figures would have exhausted pre-war American rubber stockpiles within 18 months. Natural rubber supplies from South America and Africa, combined with stockpiles, might have extended that to 2 years. Then production would have halted. Synthetic rubber transformed that equation. By 1944, American synthetic rubber production exceeded natural rubber imports by a factor of 4. The constraint had been eliminated. German generals surrendering in May 1945 were questioned about strategic miscalculations. Many cited failure to anticipate American production capacity. General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff, specifically mentioned synthetic rubber as an example where German intelligence had completely misjudged American industrial capability. He had assumed German technical superiority in chemistry would prevent Americans from developing equivalent synthetic rubber within reasonable timeframes. That assumption, he acknowledged, had been disastrously wrong. General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, asked what surprised him most about American military capability, responded immediately. Their trucks. They had unlimited trucks because they had unlimited rubber. We calculated they would run out. They never did. That alone told us we had miscalculated everything about American industrial capacity. Post-war analysis by German industrial experts confirmed that synthetic rubber represented a decisive American advantage. The United States Bomber Survey interrogated German chemical industry leaders extensively. Dr. Otto Ambros, IG, Farben's synthetic rubber program director, stated that American achievement in 3 years equaled what Germany had accomplished in 15 years at substantially lower cost per ton. He attributed American success to superior petroleum feedstock availability, better industrial coordination, and willingness to invest massive capital rapidly. The long-term impact extended beyond military victory. American synthetic rubber production established domestic industry that transformed from strategic necessity to commercial success. By 1950, synthetic rubber production exceeded natural rubber consumption in the United States. The war-borne industry became permanent, proving that strategic necessity could create competitive commercial capacity. The patents developed during the synthetic rubber program entered public domain after the war, as government financing requirements had stipulated. This knowledge transfer accelerated global synthetic rubber development. European and Asian industries adopted American processes and formulations. By 1960, synthetic rubber comprised 60% of global rubber consumption. Today, approximately 70% of rubber used worldwide is synthetic, descended directly from formulations developed during the wartime emergency. The organizational lessons from synthetic rubber production influenced post-war American industrial policy. Government financing of private development, patent pooling for critical technologies, and coordinated research between universities and industry became models for future programs. The Manhattan Project received more publicity, but the synthetic rubber program demonstrated similar coordination principles applied to industrial production rather than weapons research. American workers involved in synthetic rubber production understood they had participated in something historically significant. Veterans of Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, and other synthetic rubber plants spoke with pride about their contributions. They had built an industry from scratch, solved problems considered unsolvable, and produced material that helped win the war. Their achievement received less recognition than combat contributions, but mattered equally for victory. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.